Welcome to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. How do we learn to truly thrive together? How do we stay connected to our authentic selves, each other, and our purpose as a team, especially when challenged? How do we unlock the deeper levels of group intelligence? Enjoy this episode of the Connected Teamwork podcast and learn practical tools to evolve the connectedness of your team to its next level.
Welcome to the Connected Teamwork Podcast, episode 59. My name is Hilke Faber, and I'm here today with Diana Berkman, Chief of Staff. Diana, how are you today?
I'm wonderful, Hilke. Thank you so much. And yourself?
I am great, and thank you for being here. Before we get to know more about Diana, I'm going to say a bit more about this podcast, as we do with most of the Connected Teamwork podcasts. This podcast is about helping each of us in teams to connect more deeply to ourselves, each other, and our purpose. Last week, I spent the week in workshops with teams in India. And what I found is just watching those teams and what happens when people start to speak more and more of their truth, when they start to be more supportive of each other, when they start to become braver and it becomes clear what the overarching purpose is, how much energy gets unleashed. And that to me is so inspiring. And that's part of why we're doing this, that this experience of being unleashed together becomes more and more a reality. And we transform some of those mindsets, which may be about, I'm scared of others and I'm scared of myself, turns into, I really trust others and I really trust myself. And that, given the current state of evolution of human beings, is a tall order that we can all contribute to, from my perspective. We're here with Diana Berkman. She's a chief of staff, comes to us with so much experience, approaching 30 years in the business process outsourcing and customer experience industry, where she began her journey on the front lines at a contact center. She has held many different roles, supporting companies globally across the Americas, APAC, and EMEA. And she's known for being a passionate leader driven by purpose and commitment to serving people. She currently has a dual role as chief of staff and head of portfolio, and she's focusing on connectedness, fostering strong relationships and collaboration among her clients and with her colleagues. She loves the outdoors, talk about that in a second, health and wellness, and spending time with family and friends, and being on the golf course. And sunshine fuels her, both literally and figuratively. That's one of the things I connected with in my prep conversations with Diana. She brings a dose of what she dubs vitamin D to others whenever, wherever, and however she can. Another tidbit is she's married to her high school sweetheart, and they're about to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary. Also, from that part of life, practicing connectedness. What a joy to be with you. Diana, I was so struck by our conversation early on and how clear you were about what you bring to others. So say to us a little bit more about what you've learned about connectedness in teams and in leadership in your very long and distinguished career.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Hilke. And, I think the thing we can all connect to is there's always a way to lean into connectedness. And for me personally, it started very young in my career, as my family grew up in a farming and ranching community, agricultural community in eastern Colorado, which you and I spent a little time talking about previously. And it takes the whole village in a family when you're running family-owned businesses to make those successful, and many other people to make those successful, and to still have a thriving family and home environment. And my parents really helped establish that foundation for me as a child. And then in my work, I was fortunate enough to find myself in the BPO business, kind of unintentionally, but it's the way it worked out, as it many times does in our careers, right? And for me, being on the front lines in the contact center in the late 90s, not to age myself here, but in the late 90s in the contact center, and that connectedness came from learning how to connect with a customer, in this case, on the other end of the phone, just simply trying to get to what the root of the problem was, but really what was important to them, and connecting with them in whatever way they wanted to connect in the most meaningful way for them, and then ultimately to take care of whatever they were calling in or contacting the company about, but really making that connection with the customer. And what I realized was I had an opportunity to build brand loyalty for the company in that 3 or 5 or 15-minute phone conversation I was having with a customer who had no idea who I was on the other end of the phone. So that connectedness started very early in the very frontline job I had in the contact center, helping people fix their printers.
Wow. Yes, yes, yes. I'm very curious also because of my own background in farming, growing up on a dairy farm. Tell us more about how did your parents instill this integration of connectedness and getting things done? Maybe you have an anecdote or an example you can share.
Yeah. It's a really good question. And we came from a family of 7, just to my parents, with 5 children. So there was a lot to care for in terms of the people of the family, but also the household, the pets we had, the businesses, the farming, etc. And my parents were always very clear about who was responsible for what and by when. And so while it was a team of this family bringing things together and making things happen, but we always had absolute clarity in what the expectation was for us. And if we needed help, had questions, couldn't do it on our own, you learned to ask for help. But mostly it started with real clear. What is it that we're working towards? Why is this important? And who's responsible for this piece of it and this piece of it and this piece of it? And how does all of that come together to accomplish the goals we had as a family and as a family business?
That's great. So a real sense of clarity was established, and that helped to build connectedness because it was like, I think it builds trust when you have that.
That's right.
So,
And we
so
all
te-
knew that ultimately we had different roles in whatever
yeah,
it was we were working on, but we knew that collectively, when we each did our part, we accomplished what the goal was overall. So I think having that understanding of what am I doing this for? What is my purpose here? I might not see it just in my own lane, but if I can see holistically how it matters to the greater good of, in this case, the family, it really was a driving force for behaving and wanting to do your part.
beautiful. So that sense of being purposeful, that then I sense also helped to galvanize you when you worked in customer service, being in service of the brand and creating experience. And so tell us what happened then. How, because we're talking late 90s, so it's a few
Yeah.
years that passed since then. Tell us what happened after that.
Yeah, a few years indeed have passed. Well, that business is changing and transforming, mostly thanks to technology, in both from a consumer perspective, and a business perspective, and certainly the likes of AI recently in our business. And there can be this feeling of technology actually creates less connectedness. And so actually that skill as a teammate, as a member of a team in business, and as a leader is even more important than it ever was before, because we have screens, we have all of these ways that technology helps us be more productive and gives us great opportunities, but it can also be a deterrent for us to really make good, strong human connections, especially in this virtual world where many of us don't sit across the table or the aisle from each other in the traditional office sense any longer.
So tell us a bit more about, like, how do you then forge connection in that virtual world? You're no longer in customer service directly, you're chief of staff, amongst other things. So tell us about how you do that. And one thing I'm actually curious about is part of that. is how do you stay connected to yourself? Because I remember vitamin D is a big part of you.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I think it starts with ourself, right? If we're healthy and have good overall wellness, mental, spiritual, physical, whatever those things are that are important to each of us individually, when we first take care of ourselves, we're better able to care for the people we're responsible for supporting in business and what we're responsible for delivering in business. And so it always starts with us, right? And understanding what do I personally need. For me, that's sunshine and getting outdoors. I know that. That's in terms of my physical well-being and also my mental well-being. The sunshine is what fuels me, literally and figuratively, as I said. And a good friend, an old previous boss of mine, used to make that statement. It's my vitamin D call of the day. And it was sort of like, okay, what's the greatness happening? And also, what are the challenges and how do we see our way through that? And that's again coming back to, for you yourself, staying connected and true to your values, what your personal objective and purpose is in your life, and how do you connect that to the work that you do, so that you're showing up the best version of yourself, and your team, your clients, your leaders, your peers get that view of you when you
Yes.
show up.
And you make it sound as if it's effortless, and I sense it's not.
Yeah,
My flight was delayed 24 hours this weekend back from India, and I had to really work on myself to make sure I stayed very respectful yet clear with the agent who was rebooking the flight for me. So tell us about, what do you do when things don't go well, when it might feel internally that the vitamin D is nowhere to be found? What do you do?
Yeah. Well, the first thing, I get really focused on what is the goal here. Sometimes that can happen for me personally, in my own setting, if I'm working on something and feel stuck or spinning my wheels, and also in the team. A lot of our days in business, at least for me, and the role that I have, is about solving problems and overcoming challenges. And the first thing is making sure we're clear on what's the problem to solve here, what's the thing we're trying to accomplish, so that everybody gets clear on what's the goal, what's the outcome of this. And then we can figure out what are the ways and what are the options, what are the roadblocks that are in front of us that we need to overcome in order to achieve that. And that comes back to just being really grounded. What's my goal here, me personally, or us as a team in the business environment? And I have the unique ability and honor to work with people across lots of different parts of our business, and people who come from all walks of life and who have all different types of jobs across the business platform, if you will, and just getting everybody centered on what is it we're trying to accomplish and what's the outcome that we know that we have achieved success in whatever it is we're trying to do. And then who's responsible for what and by when, and what do they need in order to be successful.
Almost like what you learned way back when as a young person on the farm, or in your family's business. Question is, to me, is how do you balance getting people focused on the goal, and let's think about where we're going, at the same time creating space for grievances, difficult things being discussed? So how do you make sure that the authentic conversations still happen, even though we're super focused on the goal?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And for me, I tend to see things mostly through the positive lens, which, by the way, is not always healthy, right? And I know this about myself. So it's about having the courage to have tough conversations, and as a leader and as a teammate, to really genuinely actively listen to the people that you're working with. Because you have to also listen, whether it's your client or your teammate or a colleague. You have to listen for what's not being said, and then really understanding that and asking better questions so that you can get to the root of what might be causing us to not be able to move forward in this project or this effort. So active listening, and then using that to ask better questions so that you can seek to understand first before you immediately jump into how are we going to solve this problem. And then getting to how do we collaborate? What are the ways? And you can do that with the carrot or with the stick, so to speak. And my preferred approach is, I know I work with a bunch of superstars. So if there's anybody who can figure it out, it's us. So all the noodles go on the wall. Let's throw them up there. And we'll figure out what's going to stick and what's our best way forward. Maybe there's not a perfect solution, but let's collaborate and get creative on ways that we can solve this. But when everybody has an opportunity for their voice to be heard at the table and to address what their concerns might be, their ideas, so there is collaboration, and the whole team, where it's appropriate, the whole team is having input into that.
We're going to take a short break. After the break, I want to go a double click on this, what you said about listening to what's not being said. And maybe you can share an anecdote after the break about how do you do that? And how do you know there's something not being said? Because that to me is a very high skill that not always is easy to come by, especially not in today's environment. We are in the Connected Teamwork podcast speaking with Diana Berkman. She's a chief of staff and a bringer of vitamin D, amongst many other things, to the business world and to anyone that she meets. I'm your host, Hilke Faber. See you after the break.
You are listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Do you want to learn more about building the next level of connectedness in your team? Please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
So we've been talking with Diana Berkman, Chief of Staff, amongst others, and also talking about the value of purposefulness and this question about how do we listen to what's not being said. I love that you said that, Diana. I think that's such an important thing. So share a little bit more about that, maybe an anecdote or something that you learned about that.
Yeah, certainly. Well, when we're in a room together, it's easy to watch body language. On video, a little less so, but that's the world that a lot of us live in these days. And I think just a couple of tactical things about that is being really present. So we have all the dings and the pings and all of those things that are happening in our technology-based operating environment for a lot of people who are, even if you're in an office, there's still a lot of remote sessions that are happening. And just whether you're sitting across the table or sitting across the camera from someone, to really be present and be listening for when I say what's not being said, thinking about the situation at hand through the lens of the other person or people who are part of this discussion. And what is their motivation? What might they be trying to solve that maybe they don't have the courage to say? And so really listening to it thinking about it from their lens. And I like to consider that a superpower of mine, is to see things from other people's perspectives. And so thinking about the problem we're solving or the conversation we're having through their seat helps you kind of empathize with whatever it is they might be communicating. And then you can connect to, okay, I can understand where they're coming from. And the thing I like to say most is, tell me more about whatever it was that maybe I picked up on, that there might be something more that I should learn and I should really seek to understand, so that I can make sure I have the whole picture before we move this conversation forward or figure out a way to solve it. But just tell me more about, and it's not planting a seed, it's not leading the witness, so to speak. It's just really genuinely wanting to understand more about whatever that is that triggered you to think there might be something more I should know, or they might have something more they should share.
To tell me more, you said, and what I'm curious about, so you then come across somebody sometimes that may have a motivation that is polar opposite from what is in your mind, that may point to values that are totally different from yours. I'm thinking in the US, we're in the midst of an election year. I think it's a really important skill to focus on. How do you stay open when you talk to somebody, let's keep it business, in the business world, who was clearly coming from a very different point of view? How do you stay open? How do you do it?
Yeah, the thing for me is I'm always curious to understand why somebody thinks the way that they think or has the view that they have. And for me, it's about wanting to understand them as a human being and what's important to them. But it's also about, what can I learn? What should I be learning? There's a lesson in this for me too. And so having that natural curiosity and just caring about other people, and that's kind of the connectedness, right? I want you to be successful in whatever it is that's important to you. And the better I can understand that, the better I can help us collaboratively come up with a way forward on whatever it is we're working on. So that's the approach I take, is I'm interested in the person, and I'm also interested in what should I be learning from this.
I sense deep curiosity, deep care, and also deep humility. Deep humility, that you're really wanting to learn something from this. So what happens then if you come to the realization that what they want and what you think is best is just very different? What do you do?
Yeah. What I like to ask people, how do they suggest we move forward? So we're sort of at a crossroads. We can't come to a conclusion together. This, we can't even agree to disagree, because we still have to do whatever it is we're doing, right? It's different if you're having a conversation personally. You can just agree to disagree and be good. That's not always the case in business and in working with teams. And so again, I come back to, how do they see we could move this forward? What's one thing that we could do that would help push this forward, and know that at the end of the day, we have to get to the outcome we have to get to. And generally, if there's a disconnect, it's because we're not aligned on what the common goal is. Even if I have a mission I personally need to do for the role I have, and somebody else has something completely different or has a totally different view, at the end of the day, we know we have a bigger goal as a company or as a team we're trying to solve for, and getting back to being grounded on that will help us find our path on how we close the gap.
Back to the farm. What's our
Right.
objective?
Yeah.
And let's figure it out together.
Yeah.
I love that. I also love that you say, how do you suggest we move forward? I sense in what you're saying, Diana, a deep commitment to stay what's being called in the arena with the other person.
Yeah.
And also to stay in a deep sense of care for the other person and for the purpose. Not get lost in the polarization, actually unify in the purpose. Okay, so what does Diana do when she gets tired and she realizes the vitamin D quotient is going down and she's in the midst of it? What do you do?
Yeah. Great question. In the midst of the vitamin D is depleted, and first of all, you have to really know your own clues for yourself. Like, do you have good self-awareness for when that is happening? And what are the coping mechanisms? For me personally, my coping mechanism might be to say, do you mind if we take this call while I take a walk? I'm going to go outside. I don't need to look at the screen per se, or we can still be on video and I can make facial contact with you through video. But do you mind if I take this call when on a walk, or just taking a break? And for me, it is getting some exercise. I love rebounding. It's a really simple way. It doesn't require any effort in terms of, I can walk outside my office door and do 5 minutes of rebounding, and that just gets my energy flowing, even if I can't get the literal vitamin D from Mother Nature. But just finding that reconnectedness for me and taking a step away. That's almost always the best part for me, is just taking a deep breath. And it's the disconnect in order to get connectedness.
The disconnect to connect. I love that.
Yeah.
What's rebounding look like for you in between meetings?
Yeah.
Curious.
So rebounding is literally like when you were a kid, you might have had one of those really mini trampolines in your home that your parents had for you, or maybe when you went to visit your family, they had one. Well, now that it is actually a form of exercise for adults also. And it's just a very simple, you can do it for 30 seconds or for 30 minutes, however much time you have, different exercising, but very good for your lymph nodes, and it's easy on the joints, and you don't have to change your clothes. You can just literally hop on and do as much bouncing as you can bounce, and it re-energizes, for me anyhow, re-energizes me and gets the blood flowing when I'm in the office environment for too long.
I love it. Rebounding to bring the vitamin D up, the energy up.
Yeah.
And so what do you notice when you notice the person sitting across from you or the other people in the meeting? Well, you feel all like ready, and the people around you like, oh, not so much. What do you do?
Yeah. When I know them well, I usually know what their form of vitamin D is. And I'll suggest, let's do that. Let's take a deep breath. Let's literally go for a walk, depending on the person. Let's go get a cup of coffee. Let's take a deep breath and take a step back here. Let's talk about, one of my favorites is, just give me 2 words to describe how you feel right now. The difference between asking people for 1 word versus 2 words is how much more insight you can get about where is their mental state. I'm very tired, or I'm very anxious, or whatever it is, to just get to where their state of mind is, and then helping them navigate through that.
2 words. My 2 words right now is deeply grateful. And I'll tell you why, because I sense your deep care for the others in an integration of the business goal and the persons that you're working with and yourself. So all 3 at once. We're getting towards the end of our conversation. Surprisingly, it flew by. What do you want to say to somebody who maybe at this very moment, as they're listening, are just not feeling it? They may have been a very tough day for whatever reason. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would just say to them, just take 1 step, whatever that is for you. If that's 1 step toward that really big project that you haven't started and you've been procrastinating because it feels like it's Mount Everest, just take 1 step. If you have a relationship that you're challenged with at work and getting through to the person, just take 1 step toward how can you seek to understand them. So just moving yourself forward. It's the saying of life is like a bicycle, right? The only way we keep going is to keep pedaling, and that would be my feedback. Take 1 step toward that for yourself, so that you can be in a better place to connect with the people you work with and the work that you do.
Take 1 step to literally rebound. And don't make it too complex. And I also hear a lot this conversation, Diana, about forward momentum, moving forward into whatever we are doing together. So we're getting to the very end of our conversation, and you've been working for a few decades. What do you want to say to the generation that's just starting in their 20s about connectedness? Because I know when I was in my 20s, I was thinking about this entirely different. What would you say to them?
Yeah, to the generation that's upcoming, don't be afraid of it. The human to human connection. And what I would say to the upcoming generation is, find your way. What is the way that you connect the most, in the most meaningful ways? Find that, and lean into who you are authentically, versus trying to fit the mold of whatever the environment is. We do have to be adaptable, and to our surroundings, to the other people. But when you're true to who you are, you'll find the most significant connectedness with other individuals and in the work that you do when you stay authentic to yourself.
Thank you so much, Diana. That's a beautiful close. Couple of things I'm taking away from this conversation. One is disconnect to connect. Think about your forward moving purpose. What is that you're moving toward? Think about really listening to understand and staying open and present also when the other person may come from a very different place. And then always take the next step. Always take the next step. That often starts with taking care of yourself. I'm sitting here thinking, if all 8 billion of us could learn a little bit from you, Diana, be a little bit like you in our own way, I think we as humans would probably do a lot better on this big spacecraft called Earth if we really try to understand each other and do that with a lot of care for each other and ourselves and what we're really here for. Thank you so much, Diana. It's been a deep pleasure. Anything else you want to say by way of closing?
I appreciate you, Hilke. Thank you for leading this conversation in a world where we need more of it. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Diana. I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody listening today and listening to the recordings. If you like this podcast, you can tune in on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and then you can follow this podcast everywhere you get podcast, Apple, Spotify, everywhere. This is the Connected Teamwork podcast. We're here almost every Monday. I'm your host, Hilke Faber, was here today with Diana Berkman. See you next time on the Connected Teamwork podcast, where we help leaders and team connect more deeply to what's truly important to them. Enjoy.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Take a moment to reflect on what you learned today that can help build your team. Also, if you like, think about one of your team members and what you appreciate about them. Let them know. Enjoy connecting more deeply to what is great about them. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork podcast.